Alrighty, everyone. Thank you again for attending today's workshop. We are so excited to have you. I just want to give a preface before we get started and I introduce our guest speaker today that this month is Occupational Wellness Month with Healthy Lifestyles, and we have a lot of great things happening, such as this workshop today. Please make sure if you haven't already participated in Occupational Wellness Month, go to the Healthy Lifestyles website, and we have all of the activities listed under programs for this month. Upcoming next week, we have a motivational speaker, as many of you may have already signed up for. So if you're interested in that and you haven't signed up for that yet, please do so. And I will put the link in the chat for the Healthy Lifestyles program page in just a moment. Now to introduce our guest speaker today, we have Doug Castillo with us. Doug has devoted over a decade researching the human operating system, why people do or don't do anything. He recently joined Salt Lake County to support the mayor's initiative to make the organization a place where diversity is celebrated and everyone feels welcome. He is proud to align with the vision for the county and continue the momentum on inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. I'm sure you guys have heard the acronym IDEA, or the big idea. As an ally, an advocate, and an educator, and most of all, a learner. Doug, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, and I like to speak on anything that can help make life a little bit easier. And I love what y'all are doing over there at Healthy Lifestyles. You know, I'm a huge fan, so it's good to be on today. So thank you so much. With that, folks, I
I'll
want to
take a
just guide
look
us
and see.
through.
Let's
One
see.
is
Let
just
me
to
just
be
check
aware
that. I
of
can do it right
your
now.
microphones to make
Yep, I
sure
see
that
it there.
you
And I'm
are
clicking on
on
the
mute. Looks
attachment.
like we're just getting a little bit of feedback back, feedback back. So I'll keep a monitor over that. But just again, for the duration of today, just make sure that you are checking the button here in the corner. So there's a couple things I want you to be aware of. One is you have the chat function here. So I'm going to monitor the chat to the best of my ability. And then Brittany, if you wouldn't mind kind of helping out if I miss something, I'll put a break in the chat every now and again. You may be used to this if you've been to one of my trainings. But again, folks, if I could ask just to maintain audio integrity, just make sure your mute microphone or the microphone itself you'll find in the bottom corner is not illuminated. So the mute is your microphone's on mute. That would be very helpful. If you do have a question, you're welcome to click the hand raising icon, and I'll do my best to be able to answer your question. And it lets me know that you're ready to be taken off mute and ask a question. Obviously, you can always use the chat function. There's also some quick reactions to some possible dad jokes that may be inserted throughout today's training. I can't help it. I do my best. Okay. We're also going to be using, and this always depends on the device that you're logging in from, obviously. But I'm going to use a couple Slido polls here today, just kind of poll the group on a couple of our topics here today. It's anonymous, and it's a great way to kind of start things out. All right, with that, my hope is that you attended today's training or something about the title really grabbed your attention around the ability to say no or setting boundaries. I'm going to be sharing with you a little bit of the concepts that I have learned over time, both professionally and personally. Prior to coming to the county, and I've only been here for just under 2 years. I worked as a leadership consultant and an executive coach, and I would go into organizations and primarily work with leadership on setting up systems where folks really enjoyed their workplace environment. That was my job, and I feel like I get to use those same skills here at Salt Lake County. But I've been in a diversity of different industries, from construction to hospitality to health industries to recruiting industries to sales, a lot of sales organizations, and found that we all kind of struggle with the same stuff. You know, no matter where you go, we're all people. And that's actually comforting in a way of, we interact with folks and we have the same challenges. We also have passions that we can share together. And the content that I'm going to be sharing with you is a mix of a few trainings that I wanted to kind of give you the juiciest bits of around boundaries. And there's a lot to be found on boundaries out there in the world. So I highly encourage doing some of your own work. Obviously, some of you already come to the table with some great tools. So I'm looking forward to learning from you here today. All right. And so I want to give you a structure to walk away with today. Not only just some concepts, some best practices, but also even a process that you can utilize on your own to set some more powerful boundaries in your own life, and kind of the concept that I see around boundaries. Now, by no means is today comprehensive. If I've left something out that seems very vital, I hope that you will plug that into your own practice here today. We only have an hour to be able to share on, to me, a concept that interacts in our personal, professional, our self world. And it really is in play in most every conversation that you have. And so it is complex because we're dealing with other human beings. And so how do we go about doing this? And how do we peacefully, safely, and powerfully hold on to boundaries in our own lives? So I want to start today with a bit of a story. I was actually going to share this a little bit later on, but I think we're gonna jump right into it. So one of my fondest memories as a kid, I'm from Pocatello, Idaho. Anybody from Idaho, give a shout out in the chat window. So I'm from Pocatello, Idaho, or so we call it Pokey. And my mother and father are both from a small farming community outside of Pocatello, about 45 minutes, a little town called Aberdeen. When I was visiting, there was not even a street light. I think there was probably two four-way stops, and that's about it. But it's a cute farming community. My relatives are all from Aberdeen, and some of my fondest memories were going out to my grandma and grandpa's house. And both grandparents um, had farms in this community, and most of them cattle farms or dairy farms. One of the most enjoyable memories of going out to my grandparents' house was to go out and play in the barnyard. And so you'd have like kind of the homestead area, and then you'd have the whole barnyard area. And there was a series of different barns, and some were kind of old and dilapidated. But you had this distinct area of places where you could play, and then places as young kids, it's best not to play. And one of those places, it's best not to play was the places where the cows were. You don't want to get messing out there with the cows. Now, take to the chat window box. Why is it not a good idea to go out and play in the pasture with the cows as young children? Now, we would really want to go out there because we would build slip and slides out there in what we thought was mud. So cow pies. Okay. So cow pies, surprisingly, yes, they were a part of the problem, but they weren't the biggest problem. Brittany nailed it here. Yeah, we could upset the animals and we could end up getting trampled. In fact, usually amongst all these cows, there was always one bull that was watching out. Now, it was fine as long as we weren't in the pasture. The bull would have no problem. In fact, the cows seemed largely harmless. But the moment we crossed over this thin little wire, we were instantly notified by a couple different alarm systems that we were possibly in danger. One alarm system was it was an electric fence. And I'm the youngest of four children, so it's inevitable that one of my older siblings would always try to convince me to see if the fence was hot, see if the fence was on. It was all about who can we get to touch the fence, because if that's the case, then we can just lift up the wiring and go exploring. But that was the first boundary that we had to encounter, and that boundary had certain consequences to it. But if we were to make it through those consequences, there were other consequences beyond that boundary that would rise in and escalate in intensity if we were to choose to cross that boundary. And today's lesson, I'm going to centralize around this idea of what are some of the boundaries that we have, and ultimately, why is it a good idea to have boundaries, and why isn't it a good idea to allow people to cross our boundaries? And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but I'll tell you just kind of finish the story. We would still find a way through this electric fence. And usually, the bull would kind of raise its head up, maybe snort a couple times. That was our warning. And over time, if we kept crossing that boundary and getting deeper into the pasture, maybe it would start clawing a little bit at the dirt, sending us a little bit of a stronger signal. Always gentle in this way. And then before long, it was a full on charge. Not to say that that's not part of the exhilaration of crossing into the pasture here, or the pasture here, but with that in mind, there are levels here to that. But the truth be told, Grandpa always told us, don't cross into the pasture. Don't cross into the pasture. And over time, we learned our lesson. And so those are some boundaries that were very clear to us. So let's talk about boundaries here today. And we'll kind of share in the conversation here today and talk about this. But let's talk about boundaries on a physical front, because there's a lot of different kind of boundaries. And like I said, we're not going to have a comprehensive lesson here on boundaries because it's very complex, but I'm going to take some unique angles and let you walk away with some plug and play systems to hopefully help us all out. So with that, let's talk about some physical boundaries. When you are talking to somebody, what's your typical physical distance that's comfortable? Take to the chat window box and tell me what you think is the standard physical boundaries when communicating with somebody. Is it 6 inches? Is it 18 inches? Is it 6 feet? Okay, so I'm seeing a solid 5 feet. Okay, Angie has a solid boundary there. 3 feet, Julene says 3 feet. That's being echoed several times. 2 feet. Okay, so we've got some distances. 12 inches, it said. Okay, now Julene says, unless it's my husband's family, then it's 3 inches. Okay, so they have some different boundaries here. So okay, I think we can say, okay, so D comes in and says, depending on the person, 6 inches to 3 feet. So my question is, does it depend on the person? Who is it that I'm talking to? Is it a complete stranger on the street? If it's a stranger on the street, does my physical distance change? Now, for some of us, no, it's always the same, no matter what. For others, it's like, yeah, even time of day. Now, what about this? What if you're sitting in an airplane next to a stranger? Then what is the standard physical distance on an airplane? As much as we'd all prefer 5 feet or 6 feet, Angie's very uncomfortable. I agree with that. As far away as possible, but as far as we can possibly adjust, but we're not talking about anything more really than 2 feet. And so that also changes the dynamic of the boundary, is the place of the boundary, versus if I was facilitating this conversation in a live group, a comfortable distance between you and I would probably be 10 feet or more. If I was talking to you any closer at this volume, it would be very uncomfortable for both of us. And how many of you have ever been in a conversation where this physical boundary didn't fit the person nor the situation, and therefore made you or the other party upset or uncomfortable, I would say? If so, go ahead and type a Y in the chat window box if you've ever been in a situation where the other party made the situation or that conversation uncomfortable. And so my question is what did we do? How did we respond to their incursion or them crossing our boundary in that moment? So tell me, what do you do? What do humans typically do if somebody's a close talker and they're having this conversation with you? Okay, so we may back away. We may even ask for space. We may step back. Okay, most individuals that I've ever met, there is a physical response, even if it's in the face. It's like, well, I don't want to make them feel bad, but my face is kind of like backing up. We know when our boundaries are getting crossed because generally there's not only an intellectual or emotional, but even a physical response. And that's an important message for all of us to acknowledge when our boundaries are crossed, because it tells us something's going on here that's uncomfortable for me. Something feels unsafe, or there is an agreement that is being crossed or infringed upon. And so the standard physical boundaries is just one thing. And I think it's really easy to see. That's why I kind of like to start out with this idea. But boundaries are not limited to our physical conversations. There's so many different areas that this can show up. Yes. Okay, we have some folks historically have had to share siblings or rooms with siblings, and therefore you have grossly large boundaries, and probably appropriately so. I hear you on that. So with that, I'm going to ask this question here, and I want you to think about it first, and I'll ask for responses. why is it important to have boundaries? You know, going back to the farmyard, why is it important for there to be boundaries around the pasture or different areas? But in our personal lives, in our professional lives, why is it important to have boundaries? So let's actually share this. I'm going to open up a Slido poll. Most of your devices should be able to see a pop-up rising on the right-hand side of your screen. This gives us something to be able to see, especially for those who are watching the recording today. They'll actually get to see more of the chats. But if you only have the chat available, that's great too. So let's take a look at why is it important to have boundaries, both personally and professionally. So I'll take these as they pop in. I appreciate your interaction. I'll take some of the chat windows options here first. So safety, personal sanity, yes, for sure. And then we have safety, thriving, keeping yourself and others safe. Infectious diseases, absolutely. So going to what we see on the screen here, so we don't get hurt. Again, physically, emotionally, intellectually. Safe space, self-care, safety and thriving because of that safety, absolutely. For your protection, comfort, stress, um, protect your mental health, absolutely. Personal growth, safety, ethics is important there. Pressure, self-preservation, not to get overwhelmed, to protect ourselves and others, for my own safety, for those I'm working with. Anxiety, yeah, all of these things are really great reasons and why it's important as human beings that we have boundaries. And I think this is really important for us to know, and everybody's going to have some different boundaries, but it's important to identify is boundaries are great ways to identify where I end and you begin, you know? So here I have me, and then here we have others. Boundaries are important for me to know what I am willing to accept and allow in my space. Boundaries aren't so much about your behavior as it is about what I'm willing to allow in my space. Boundaries cannot be as effective if it's about controlling others. Controlling others is about getting crossing others' boundaries, where healthy boundaries are about what I am willing to allow in my presence. And there's a lot of really great work, and I'm not an expert on trauma care response, but I'm seeing in the chat window some chat on this, and it's the what I've learned about it. It's been really powerful, and so if you want to dive in deeper, it's something worth checking out. And so why we have boundaries is it helps us to identify, what's important to us, what we'll allow, and also it helps us to create rules and guidelines for our lives. It's kind of like this. When I'm traveling to Idaho to visit family, how do I know I'm leaving Idaho and entering Utah? Well, there's a distinct boundary. Now, while I'm in Idaho, I am under the jurisdiction of Idaho rules and laws. And if I don't understand what those laws are and I decide, oh, I'm going to go 95 on the freeway because that's what I do in my home state, not the case, obviously, but um, and somebody pulls me over, a cop pulls me over, and I say, well, I'm actually from Utah and I do this all the time. Um, how's that officer going to respond? Oh, it's okay. I'm from Utah. I do this all the time. That Idaho patrolman or patrol person is probably going to be like, well, you're in Idaho. You got to live by our boundaries now. Like this is where we have different rules up here. And Angie says, yeah, they'll definitely laugh at you, for sure. I'm sure there would be a good joke in there. But that's boundaries help create definition. It helps us to create expectation. It helps us to again keep ourselves safe. How do we know the laws and the rules for Idaho are working for Idahoans in general? And I don't want to get into some deep philosophical and policy-based conversations here. Is well, those seem to be the right rules for them, so that's what they do. Okay, right? And so the officer will tell us to go back to Utah. Thank you, Misty. I appreciate that comment. So let's talk about boundaries here on a personal note. First and foremost, boundaries are about discovering what works for me, what I'm willing to allow. Obviously, we work in environments with other folks with other boundaries. and it's about finding what works for me and also what works for them. And I have a different training on how do we work in rule structures in all of our diversity of relationships. But ultimately, today's conversation is just this. I want to just focus in on how do we discover what's working for us and how to create healthy boundaries around that so that we can keep doing what works for us. Boundaries are about my interactions with others and the rules I make about myself so I don't have to keep learning that lesson over and over and over and over again. All right. So, really kind of isolating this down. And I'll emphasize one more time, boundaries are not about controlling others. If that's the case, we are doing boundaries wrong. Boundaries are all about, okay, this is what works for me. And I'm going to use a lot of examples here today, hopefully, to illustrate my point. And if you don't agree with that, that's okay too. Right. So, this gets down to one of my favorite principles I ever teach. And it's absolutely simple, but revolutionary. And I call this the guiding principle of all success. Here's, if you want to put yourself on the super speedway to success, this one thing I want you to commit to in your life. And I'm going to share it. And most of you are going to go, okay. Oh, I thought it was going to be huge, Doug. I thought you were going to tell me the big thing. It is the big thing. So here it is. The guiding principle of success. Figure out what doesn't work. Figure out what does work. Stop doing what doesn't work and start doing what does work. That's pretty much the end of the training. Everything else is here, icing on the cake. Now, we all look at this and be like, well, obviously, but type an 8 in the chat window box if you're with me and you find yourself keep doing things that doesn't work for you, even though you know it doesn't work for you. And you know what? That's okay. Have patience with yourself. But here's this guiding principle is find out what works, find out what doesn't work for you, quit doing what doesn't work, and start doing more of what does work. And why I bring this up at this point in the training is because going back to this slide here, boundaries are about my interactions with others and myself so that I don't have to keep learning a lesson over and over and over again. If I learn quickly what doesn't work for me, I can create a boundary and protect myself and others in my relationship. And so, again, guiding principle of success. Find out what doesn't work, figure out what does work in your life, quit doing what doesn't work, start doing what does work. Again, these are important places. So I want you to think about where are some areas where things aren't working for you. Basically, where do your boundaries get crossed? Now, don't enter this in yet. I just want you to think about it. Now, how do you know? How do you know if one of your boundaries got crossed? My dear friend Heidi Freeman shared with me this one thought and many thoughts, but she says basically, you know that your boundary has been violated if you want to go to complain to 10 people about something somebody else did. When was the last time you're like, oh my gosh, let me tell you what happened? Let me tell you what I heard today. Let me tell you what so and so did. Can you even believe that? That is a great indicator that somewhere either you allowed your boundary to get crossed or you allowed somebody else to cross it, or you crossed your own boundary, right? In any other iteration of that. I know that sometimes I like to watch the news, and sometimes I will be complaining about the news all day, and I realize, you know why I'm complaining? It's because I know that sometimes rehashing the news is not good for me. And I allow my boundary to get crossed, and I overindulge, and I get that news hangover, and I need to tell everybody about it. And so I love this thought in its purest form. You want to find out where your boundaries are? Find out where some of your limited or negative attention focuses in on and what we complain to others about. And yes, we can blame and justify all day long. It's them, but we are empowered as well, and we will teach, train, and educate others how to treat us. And so I want to give a shout out to my dear friend Heidi Freeman. So on that, I know she's not here. She doesn't work here, but um, she'll feel it, right? So think about your boundaries
That'd be fine.
and the different areas in your own life, and think about where you might have some boundaries that could get built here. So looking at some of these areas here, we're going to take to the Slido poll once again. In what areas listed here or beyond might you want to have more clear boundaries? So look over this list here.
Wait, what? And
And once again, we have folks that this audio, your microphone is still popping on. I'm telling you, it's inevitable. The moment somebody walks into your office is the moment your microphone is going to get turned right back on again. So once again, there's a couple ways to interact with this poll, by the way. Either if it's working on your device, you can actually just interact with the Slido poll. You can actually even pull out your smartphone device and open up the camera app as if you're going to take a picture of the screen and just point it at that funny QR code, and it will actually recognize that as a website, and you can interact with the poll in that way as well, which is pretty cool. All right, cool. So we got some polls coming in here, and mainly more so than just us all seeing where we want more clear boundaries is just a personal assessment, level of self-awareness of like, okay, where do I need more clear boundaries? And obviously, there's likely more areas, and so that's why I added the other category. But where might we benefit from boundaries? And it looks like personal boundaries, and some of these fall into the personal boundaries, obviously. Some social boundaries, friend boundaries, whether that's at work or at home. Some time boundaries, self-care boundaries, boundaries with ourselves. Much of the time, it comes down to that. Boundaries around interruptions, what we're willing to allow at work. And we create standards of behavior at work where if somebody pops into our office because our door was open a crack, and we just kind of let it slide, and then therefore that boundary can get crossed over and over and over again because we didn't do anything about it. But internally, we kind of like, we feel conflicted about it, and how do I tell somebody about that? And we do nothing, and we end up resenting and resisting folks that we want to be working alongside. So we'll talk about that. Money, finances, budget, looks like health, interactions with other departments, absolutely. Just because we can doesn't always mean we should. So what I'd like to do is dive into taking note of this personally on your own, where you might want some clear boundaries. I want to share with you a structure on setting some clear boundaries. So 3 steps to setting more effective boundaries. And take note of this. And then at near the end, we'll talk about how do we safely say no when it comes time to reinforcing some of our boundaries. So these 3 steps that we're going to walk through here today in the time that we have is one is first you got to create a rule. Now, there's more to this, but we want to create a rule to help us to learn whatever lesson that we want to learn so we can move more quickly through life and more successfully through life, but usually identify a lesson and create a rule around that. List some costs and benefits because every lesson has consequences of not learning it and benefits of learning it. And it's really important for us because that kind of builds a why for us. Why have a rule? Again, if your rule is just to control others, then again, we're going to get stuck in some conflict in our lives. And then set the consequence steps. That's step number 3. I think the difference between a rule and a boundary is a rule is just a guidance. It's kind of like a guideline, right? Where a boundary is a rule with consequences. So with that in mind, going back to our old pasture analogy, a rule would just be simply, all right, y'all see that wire fence out there, don't cross that wire fence. Well, if there were no cows or no bulls and there was no electricity in there, there would be pretty low consequences to crossing that boundary. So it would be more of a rule. A boundary says if you cross or if you touch the fence, you'll get shocked. If you cross the fence, you're going to have to face the bull. That has some consequences to it. It's very clear. Now, these consequences can be fabricated, meaning there are consequences that need to be enforced. And we'll get more into this when we get into step 3. And these consequences, more times than not, are natural consequences. Much like with me in the pasture. Nature reinforced that boundary every time we chose to cross it, almost every time. So hopefully you're bearing with my analogy here. Now you'll see in the background of my photograph here, boundaries on the freeway. Now, those are rules with consequences, right? Now, I know some people say, well, crossing that double white line on the freeway, there's only consequences if you get caught. Yeah, but there's also some natural consequences if there's traffic. So we want to be watching for that. So you'll notice I'll use a lot of this traffic analogy as well because there's some clearly marked boundaries on the freeway. So give me an example. Take to the chat window box. If there were no lines on I-15, if you woke up tomorrow morning and somebody had painted over all the lines on I-15 and got rid of the median, what would that possibly create tomorrow morning on your drive into work or drive to the grocery store or wherever you might travel? Absolute mayhem, chaos, absolute chaos, disaster, especially because we're used to the boundaries. Now, I've seen some YouTube videos where there are cultures and countries that have very few guidance on the rules of driving, and they actually negotiate that quite well. So obviously there are somehow some social rules there. But for a society like our own that has painted lines on the freeway and to have those removed, that would I would find a different route, one of our participants said. That's brilliant. Yes. It's also chaos with lines as well. Now, here's my question. Is it sometimes chaos even with lines on the freeway? Yes. How come? Because we're all driving with some different set of personal rules, don't we? And rules based off of our current scenario. And so that's why it's important for us to have boundaries for ourselves. I even told my children last night, my rule for you and as we drive around the car is to not be fighting, throwing things, and so forth, because it puts the car in danger. And I need to focus on the road because there are fools that drive out on the road that don't follow the same rules, and I got to be aware of that. That's part of my own personal rule. And yes, true to that form. Another comment came through the chat of others sometimes don't respect other people's boundaries. So again, a good solid rule starts with asking, okay, what works for me and what doesn't work for me? I'm going to give you a personal rule that it's going to sound a little bit silly, but it's true. When I was really getting clear on this element of success, saying, okay, find out what works, find out what doesn't work, do more of what's working, less of what's not working. I used to work in my organization in evenings. We'd run a lot of evening workshops, and I'd work commonly to about 10 to 10:30 at night, and I would drive home. And on my way home, I hadn't had dinner, so I'd grab dinner on my way. And you grab what's fast and easy, right? And so I would sometimes stop by and grab Taco Bell. Why? Because in my opinion, it's delicious. And I'd grab Taco Bell on my way home. And I started seeing a trend that anytime I ate late night Taco Bell, I would have a terrible night's sleep. In fact, I learned the lesson, or I identified the lesson so much that I would tell people, it's interesting. Every time I eat Taco Bell at night, I sleep terrible. And I'd laugh it off. Notice I'm starting to tell people about it, but I wasn't learning the lesson because I kept going to Taco Bell. And then I started learning, wow, okay, how could I create a rule around this? And I discovered what works and what doesn't work. What works is eating something more healthy that doesn't burden my system late at night so my body can sleep well, versus something that might be higher in calories and so forth. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to create a rule of no more late night Taco Bell for myself. So it's a personal boundary. Now, there are other boundaries that we have as societal boundaries and societal norms that are really important, like don't hit. You don't hit somebody. That's not okay. Well, you don't strike somebody. There's some people who will tap somebody on the shoulder, but even that could be a crossing of a boundary. But generally, we have some societal rules. I have a personal rule. Don't diss me, even if you're my friend. I know that some friends like to banter and joke with one another and they talk down to each other. For me, I don't allow that in my friendships. It doesn't show me that I respect me, and it doesn't show my friend that they respect me. It's not something I want in my relationship because it doesn't work for me. I didn't grow up in that mentality. For those who did, that's cool. That's great. It's about connection, and I get it's about connection. At least that's my interpretation of it, right? And so those are a couple rules that I have considered over my life is those are things that I've learned it doesn't work for me. So what I would like for you to do for a brief moment, you don't put this in the chat, it's just personally, I want you to think about one personal rule or a lesson that you have learned or a lesson that you want to learn or work on in your own life. Now you already marked one of these categories. Maybe it's about interruptions at work. Maybe it's about self-care. And we're going to work this through together using those 3 steps. Maybe it's about finances, about money. And the rule isn't always do not do this. Sometimes it's a rule that says, okay, every first Monday of every month, I look at my bank accounts so that I know where I'm at. That would be a rule. A rule could be when I put a note on my door, please do not interrupt me until 1:30 today. I put it on the door so that I can get some work done until 1:30. If it's about self-care, it's I choose to work out twice a week so that I can get my heart rate up and then I can maintain health. Rules are generally based off of a lesson that we learn that works for us or doesn't work for us. So as you write those down, I want you to consider also the season of your life. Sometimes we're like, all right, I'm cutting sugar out of my life because sugar makes me feel like junk. And your body kind of goes, are we ready to take this on? So cool. If that's a lesson you want to work on, well, what might be a step in that direction? So be kind with yourself. And also, we'll talk about communicating our rules. We want to be kind with others because when we establish new rules, that also can be a little bit alarming for others. And we'll talk about how to manage that effectively here in a moment. All right. So I want to do a couple demonstrations here and we'll walk through this. So let's do a rule kind of together here. What's one rule that you have seen in the workplace that could kill productivity and morale in the workplace? Now I'm going to bring up some rules from badly behaved bosses. This survey here out to organizations noted some of the things that really destroys morale and productivity when it comes to management is playing favorites. And I've actually seen that in our Salt Lake County Culture Report. The number one complaint was favoritism in the workplace. Making informal threats to terminate employees, that's terrible. Using company expenses for personal use, and I know some of that doesn't work here so much at the county. Mentioning poor performance in front of other employees. The same study just studied generally across the board, and it was split and based off of gender here. So I hope you'll kind of excuse that part. But just unacceptable communication habits, things that we do on the daily that we may not realize might be crossing boundaries. Using a speakerphone in an open office, gossiping, using all caps in emails, using reply all when not everybody needs to be aware of that conversation, discussing politics, not silencing your cell phones, sending emails to entire teams. Anybody ever witnessed any of these items? If so, go ahead and type a 1 in the chat window box if you ever witnessed any of these things at Salt Lake County. All caps, yes. That's hilarious. Great. All right, so those are some factors here. And so one thing you could extract from this, and we're going to use this as a test tube here today. Oh, wow. We've got items 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and 7. Maybe it's a rule of I choose not to participate in negative or fear-based gossip. Okay, we're going to use that kind of as a tester today. Is let's just say that that's one personal/professional rule that we're going to work on. All right. So right now the assignment is choose a personal rule that you kind of want to use as a test tube for today, and as a group we're going to kind of take that gossiping rule just for good measure as a demonstration here today. All right. So with that, we move from step 1 to step 2, and this is really the why. Why is this not a good idea? What are the costs and or the benefits of such a rule? Okay, you may have a rule that says I don't allow people to steal credit for my work. It's not cool. Or the rule that we're talking about here today, I choose not to participate in negative gossip or negative or fear-based gossip. So costs and benefits. Let's go to my rule of Taco Bell. What are the costs of eating late night Taco Bell for me? Well, one, I don't sleep as well. I kind of have restless legs when I eat late night Taco Bell for whatever the reason might be. Some of y'all might know. For me, I just know it doesn't work. The cost of this is, again, I'm a little bit more groggy the next morning. And there's a little bit of that guilt of like, ugh, it was delicious then, but now I kind of feel bad about it. What are the benefits of not eating late night Taco Bell? Is that I sleep better. I feel better. I'm feeding my body with more high octane fuel right before bedtime. And so those would be costs and benefits. What are the costs of being in friendships where it is labeled cool to knock each other and disregard each other? Well, it kind of normalizes negativity in a relationship for me. It highlights our faults to each other in a way that doesn't seem productive for me. What are the benefits of having a rule of I don't allow folks to badmouth me in front of me? Obviously, what you do on your own time is up to you. I don't get to control you on that. You have a right to your own opinion. But in my presence, it's not cool, you know? And I get to decide what that looks like, right? And so those are the costs and benefits. So take the chat window box and tell me, what are the costs of gossip in the workplace? And Laura, you made a note of scapegoating versus inclusion in the chat window box. I'd love a little bit more context to that in order for me to acknowledge that in a better understanding on my part. So gossip, the cost, it decreases trust, hurt feelings, creating cliques in the workplace, hurt feelings, friendships, distrust, absolutely. And then let me ask this question. What are the costs of distrust in the workplace? I'm going to put that in here. All of the above. I mean, we can lower morale. I mean, there's a lack of trust, there's a lack of communication. When there's a lack of communication or miscommunication, productivity slows. When productivity slows and work's not getting done, that falls back on all of us. And that's what I want to do is a nice loop to realize when I choose to gossip, I start contributing to missed productivity, which hurts me. In a gossipy workplace, often there's one person who is the scapegoat. Okay, thank you, Lara, for the context. In a workplace where people mind their business, then there can be more inclusivity as well. Okay, I see. Great, thank you for that. So for your own, what's the benefits? Let's get into the benefits. What are the benefits of not gossiping in the workplace? So what might be the benefits of refraining from gossip? Obviously, we individually can only control that. I can walk away. I can not participate. I can not acknowledge. Whatever. There's many different ways to do that. But better teamwork, more positive environment, less misunderstandings, creates a safer space, greater peace of mind, better morale, positive working environment and atmosphere. Yeah. Psychological safety. Fantastic. And then we could go down that rabbit hole and say, well, what's the benefit of that? What's the benefit of that? What's the benefit of that? I have a job that I look forward to going to, and I want to put more of myself into it. And at the end of the day, I feel more satisfied. And I form greater relationships and more collaboration, right? It's not to say you have to be best friends with everybody. It's about how do I do my job in a way that makes me feel satisfied? Everyone feels better about themselves. We wake up and want to go to work. Absolutely. So step number 2 is this helps me personally to understand why that's a good idea for me. And again, it helps me to get out of the place of trying to control others. And the benefit might be just self-protection. I might have some trauma in an area, historical trauma, and I need that wound to be protected, or that part of an aspect of my experience to be kind of sacred to me. And so I need to build a boundary around that to protect that until it heals or as I navigate through life in a productive way. So at this point, all we have is a rule. It's not a boundary. It's just a rule at this point, and we understand why it's important. And next, we move into the consequence steps. And I say steps because if we or somebody else crosses the boundary and we go from 0 to 150 an hour, like, I can't believe you did that. One, it's exhausting. Two, it can throw a lot of chaos in that relationship quickly and doesn't allow the other person to learn the boundary and learn the importance of respecting you and the boundary and you yourself. Added to the gossip thing, the gossipy person has to learn other ways to deal with their working environment. So one of the benefits of a lack of participating in gossip is the person who may have the habit of participating in gossip has to find other ways to to connect with others. I think that's pretty positive, right? And so consequence steps, it's when we add the consequence steps to even the natural consequences, then a rule becomes an enforceable boundary. Again, back to the farmyard here, there were a series of consequences, right? So we have my grandpa that declares the rule. Don't go out in the cows. Don't go out in the pasture, kids. Don't go playing out there. You'll get the horns, right? So he already kind of naturally shared the consequence embedded in that. We're out playing, we get bored, you know. And so we had one immediate consequence was the electrical wire. It was more of a light zap, right? If anybody's ever touched one of these electrical fences, it's survivable. It's uncomfortable though, but it's survivable. But it's just an indicator. In fact, that wasn't the first consequence. The first consequence is usually there's a light buzzing. So you knew the fence was on, generally. And then we had, if we crossed the boundary, we had the next step where the bull would kind of like tussle its horns a little bit and kind of breathe loudly. And if we kept crossing the boundaries, then we got a little bit of the hoof stomping around, and then before or mooing, and before long, it's a full-on charge. But we can't say we weren't warned because there were a series of steps along the way. And so once again, to be kind to ourselves and others, I believe having adequate steps along the way can be very helpful in for us to know that we've crossed a boundary as well as let others know like that's not okay. All right. And so let's take some possible boundary incursions because once again, it goes down to this thought here. We teach, train, and educate others how to treat us. And so when somebody crosses a boundary, how do we communicate them professionally and kindly that that's not okay? Now, I'm going to share with you some strategies, but I do not want to ignore a behavior that actually needs a level 3 incursion right up front. Meaning there are certain behaviors we don't get a gentle like, no thanks. It's a absolutely stop in the tracks. You cannot do that. I call the police now. You know, or this gets directly reported. And so I'm not going to dive into what those are. There's some policy obviously around that. Policy is basically boundaries here at the county. And there may be some degrees of that, but there's also just strictly reporting. So let's talk about just some of those general boundaries to help us to be more productive. Some ways to address at a level 1 boundary crossing is simply maybe that doesn't work for me. Oh, I think, I know you want to connect with me and you're doing it in kind of a negative way and you're just razzing me. I get why, but it doesn't work for me. Or declaring what does work for me, Hey, what works for me is that we speak positive about one another. I don't mind joking, but what doesn't work is when you take cheap shots at me and expect me to laugh about it because it's not funny for me. And it makes me trust you less or feel more distance from you. Or we simply declare a natural consequence. Hey, when you talk bad about me in my present, it makes me want to talk to you less because I only want to be around people who I enjoy and enjoy my presence. Not out of like the fact that, I think so highly of myself, but I do. And I want to nurture myself. And I may ask, like, was that your intent is to make me feel less than? Oh, no, no, no. I wanted to connect. Just how I connect. Oh, okay, cool. Well, what's some other ways we can connect? It's not me telling you how to connect with me. It's just let's find some other ways we both can connect on. We also may declare, hey, when you're late, everybody else has to catch or everybody else has to sit around and wait for you. Or when you show up to the meeting late, it's really disruptive, and and it also causes folks to trust you less because they showed up on time and you showed up late. I just don't want that for our team. So what are some ways that we can da, 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 da. Or, hey, when you steal my work, or when you talk to me that way, it feels like you're attempting to manipulate me or dump guilt on me. Is that what you're trying to do? I call that kind of labeling the action. It's not accusatory. It should be out of curiosity of like, is this your intent? Because I don't think it would be, right? So a gossip rule in the workplace would look like this with all 3 steps here. If somebody attempts to share negative gossip with me, I then, level 1, immediately interrupt them and inform them I don't engage in gossip. It's just, that's not something I like to participate in. But gosh, Doug, you've got to hear this. It's so juicy. You're going to love it. I promise you. Level 2 now. I go to level 2. Oh, I don't want to hear it. I consider gossip to be really one of below the line kind of behavior. and I don't want any part of it. Oh no, but seriously, this stuff, this is going to really, you're going to laugh. And then at that point, we move to the final level, which is I walk away. Okay. Or I don't want to hear it and I hang up. They've already got warned twice. I don't need to communicate one more time. Again, depending on the behavior, depends on those levels. A lot of times, especially as a parent with my children, it's natural consequences. Hey, when you don't listen to me the first time, it makes me feel like you don't hear me. And my job is to help protect you. And when you don't hear me the first time, it makes me nervous. So I have to raise my voice slightly because I'm afraid that you'll get hurt in this situation. Da, 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 da. And if that persists, then you don't get as many freedoms in that one area until you've learned to hear me out in the X, Y, and Z areas. Obviously, I'm speaking broadly here. So with that in mind, going back, I want you to consider for a brief moment what might be some levels of consequence for one of your boundaries. Taking a look at what some of your boundaries. So for me, my consequences about eating late night Taco Bell were natural consequences. Now let me be honest with you. Even after I set my rule about eating late night Taco Bell, I still went to Taco Bell. But I knew the consequences. And I knew that the next day I'd be groggy. And instead of complaining about it the next day, I was like, I really hope that was really delicious. Boundaries aren't meant to be crossed, but when they are our boundaries, we know what the consequences are. We want to enforce those, and we can move forward. And then I think I've already shared on our personal steps there. So let's set the consequences. Very helpful if you can tie them to natural consequences. And a lot of time in the workplace, it's a lack of trust. Wow, when you cross my boundaries, I trust you less. And that has me hesitate when I'm wanting to either work with you, work alongside with you, communicate with you, and the like. A lot of the natural consequences, either a lack of trust or a lack of communication or some kind of loss in productivity. And that affects the entire organization. And so, again, I don't proclaim that it's simple, even though it's in 3 steps, because we all will have different boundaries. And there's sometimes an impasse where my boundaries and your boundaries collide. And we've got to be able to negotiate and find out why those boundaries are important to each of us and what we can build as a boundary, as a relationship between you and I as coworkers that we can find common ground. And so Julian mentions in the chat window, I think it's important to acknowledge when we have crossed our own boundaries, and hopefully in the future, it will only happen with intention. There are times when we intentionally cross our own boundaries, but doing it without thinking, acknowledging is worse, I think. And I would agree with you on that. And I think most of the important boundaries that we have are the boundaries we have with ourselves. And that's all this is. And then, communicating those effectively and with ourselves. It's about respecting ourselves. So, are we done with the training? The short answer, no. So let's talk about this word here. No, it's simple. Two letters, right? No. And for some of us, it is so hard, including myself. I have what I call a yesitis. It's a swelling of the yes. It's a growth of the yes where I can't help it. I'm just going to say yes because I want to have my fingers in all the pies and I want to do everything and I don't want you to feel bad. And I know I can do it if I just move heaven and earth and I can do it, right? So let's talk about how do we effectively say no, because this can be very challenging, specifically when we're dealing with people of authority. And how do we do this effectively? So I want to ask you first, because I think you're brilliant and you have a lot of life experience. What are some ways that you have used to safely say no? And then I'm going to share you some of my tips and we'll wrap up today. Hopefully this is helpful. This is kind of its own topic, but it also ties into our boundaries. So it's like, so how do you say no? For some of us, no feels really offensive. Like, I don't want to say no. It feels super aggressive. So I would love to hear some of your power phrases. We'll throw those up on the screen here. We'll see how we do. Again, take to the chat, share some of your thoughts. Okay, so here's a thought. I'm unable to do that, but thank you for thinking of me. Okay, my schedule won't accommodate that. Okay, that's great too. I only can put so much into a 24-hour day, and I'm only willing to fit it into an 8-hour workday. I'm sorry, I can't do that. Well, let me think about that. Sometimes allowing a little bit of time can get us more aware of the boundaries. I used to have a personal rule, and I call it a rule because it's just what I did. If I can't think of a reason why not at the moment, it's an automatic yes. Got me in a lot of trouble there. Ooh, sorry, I can't at this time. Well, I give a compliment first, and then what I need to stop, and then with a compliment. Okay. So kind of like that sandwich. Think of me again in this future, or I don't have the bandwidth at this moment, but when do you need it by? It's a great clarity question, kind of putting it back on them. Oh, I can't right now, but thanks for asking. Maybe next time. Great. There's a line that I'll use a lot is, hey, that's not a win for me right now because, or just not, it's not a win for me. I don't need to put an excuse. But if it's my manager or somebody else, because I'm currently working on this project. So I want to share with you ways of safely saying no to your manager, because I think that's some of the times that gets sticky. I'm just waiting for my last participant to finish typing. Isn't it so exciting when somebody's typing and you want to know what they're going to say? All right, maybe it was retracted. All right, all the same, let's move forward. All right, let's talk about ways to safely say no. Here are some possible strategies. Obviously, there's a lot more, but let's take a look. How do we safely say no? I used to joke saying, how do we say no to bosses without getting killed? And really important, if you're in a management role or a supervisor role or project management role, make sure you're not doing what I call agreement dumping. Hey, I have a new report. I want you to get to me by Monday morning before our management meeting, okay? And the other person is just left with now this new thing that they have to do. And because we're a manager, we get to do that. No, 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 no. That actually falls back on us. You know, when we do this, we're not actually helping them to say yes. We're actually dumping onto them. And I have no chance really we have no idea like what they have to accommodate, right? And this happens between departments. It happens up and down the chain. So we want to be really clear on that is as managers, let's reduce task dumping. Asking permission shows a lot of respect for your employees and creates a lot more productivity. And so let's take a look at a couple things here. If my boss were to ask me a question and I'm currently faced with some challenges on that, I may ask them or I put it back on them and illustrate what I call priority management. Here's the challenge I'm facing, and da 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 da. Where is this in my priorities? So kind of putting it back onto the manager, saying, here's what I'm currently facing. You know, kind of this is my workload. How do you want me to rank this in priority? And so that your boss can help make a decision on ranking that out. This next one here would be somehow this idea that to take on an additional agreement, think whether or not you need to alter other agreements. So for me to say yes here, maybe I've got to talk to my spouse at home to make sure that it's okay because I'm supposed to pick up the kids that day. Or in order for me to say yes to this department, I got to go to another department and see if they've got some flexibility in their timeline. How often would that show a greater line of support and respect for each other if we said, you know what, I'm actually due to finish this project by Friday. Me saying yes to this right now would actually put the other agreement into jeopardy and cross their boundary. And I don't want to do that. So it's a recognition of of agreements. And this is a recognition of ability. I might say, hey, this assignment is a bit of a stretch for me. I might need some extra support. Here's something that would smooth my path in saying yes to this agreement. Meaning I've had folks that they don't love. In fact, I actually asked somebody who's dear to me that I work with to help out with one of our employee events coming up. And they said, yes, as long as you don't put me in charge of talking to other folks. Like I'm not good in front of like public speaking. And I was like, I respect hearing that and I appreciate that. And right up front, they were able to say, hey, this is a stretch for me. Please give me something that's easier or something that I can do or help support me in this area. Or simply just saying, hey, the challenge I see with this is. So these are some possibilities on ways to safely say no in compilation with some of the things that other folks have shared. I always also like to say, hey, this is not a win for me. Or I like to trick the system by saying this. Yes, if it looks like this. Yes, if you can sacrifice, some quality to get that report to you by Friday. Or yes, if you're willing to wait an extra week. So I still get to say the yes. My yes-itis is very satisfied. But I also get to hold my boundary. Now, different strokes for different folks, but what I'm going to challenge everyone to do is test out one boundary, communicate that boundary, be gentle with others as they learn that new boundary because they had free reign over your life. They were running around in the pasture of your life all day long and there was no electrical fence. And once you put up that electrical fence, it's like, wait, This wasn't the case before. Who is this person? Be patient, but be strong. Be patient with yourself and be strong. With that, thank you so much, Sadie, Brittany, for having me here. My hope is that this is just another tool that you can take into your occupational wellness and carry through the rest of your month. I really appreciate the time here today. Reach out if you have any questions. Make sure that you sign in to get your points on the SurveyMonkey survey there. I'll stop sharing so the chat's a little bit easier to find. And you'll see that in the chat window. Thank you so much, Brittany. I'll pass the floor back to you for any final thoughts. Thanks again.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Doug. We really, really appreciate you talking about this topic that is applicable to our everyday lives, right? Boundaries is so hard, especially at work and in our personal lives. And I love your analogy of, that the pasture and the electrical fence, because honestly, sometimes when we do start setting boundaries for ourselves that maybe weren't there before, the people that were free reign in the pasture, right, are going to be like, wait, hold up. So I love that. Stick and stay strong to your boundaries. And constantly reevaluate those, as well as you talked about as well. The different season in our life, different boundaries and different goals will need to be set up. So constantly revisit those. Thank you, Doug, for your words of wisdom. We always enjoy hearing from you. Like Doug mentioned, the SurveyMonkey is in the chat for attending today's workshop. So please sign in to get your 10 healthy lifestyle points. Other than that, we are completed for today. If you want to refer back to the workshop at a later time, or if you have other friends or coworkers that may find this useful to them in their situation, we always upload our workshops on the Healthy Lifestyles website, and you can find those there as well. Thank you guys so much for attending. I will stay on just in case you have any questions about healthy lifestyles, but other than that, thank you guys. I hope you have a great rest of your week. Thanks again, Doug.